Okay. Okay. So apparently we're ready, which is good. So highly, utterly effused about me, which was hugely embarrassing. But I am Rachel Lofthouse. I currently work at Leeds Beckett University. I say currently not because I have any plans to leave, but because I'm aware that I've only been there a few years. And most of those years have been pandemic and post-pandemic, and therefore somewhat odd. But whilst I've been at Leeds Beckett University, I've been able to take the work I'd done previously at Newcastle and in schools in the North East particularly, and bring it to bear to create collective ed. So highly mentioned that, and I'll just very quickly say something else about it, because if I don't, I'll kick myself. So collective ed, it is a research and practice centre. It is focused on coaching and mentoring. We've recently added in supervision, not because we're trying to claim that territory, but because we see supervision as an allied practice, and we're interested in exploring that further. And our interest in coaching and mentoring and supervision are as forms of professional learning. But let's be honest, we also see it going far beyond learning to being a process where we support and think about well-being and development, and creating opportunities and all sorts of components. Essentially, collective ed is a community. So we bring people together in a range of ways to learn from and with each other and to develop practice together. We're not enterprising particularly. We don't sit on a big budget. We don't try and make lots of money. We don't make money. But what we are able to do is connect people. And because our interest is in coaching, mentoring and supervision and professional learning, at the heart of all of that is the conversation that emerges when people connect. Now, whether that's in a coaching conversation or in a room like this or on a Zoom platform. So this week, for example, we held our first book club with one of our collective ed fellows, Victoria Carr, talking about her book, Leading with Love. And we brought people together in that space through Zoom to talk about that book and the resonances of that book with Victoria. We have a range of international contacts through Erasmus projects, for example, and others. But essentially, we are a place where we try and make sense of and help to develop practices that make a difference. Okay? At our heart, we are curious because we're scholars. We want to know more. We ask questions and we listen. I hope that's what we do. Just in case you're interested, you can follow us on Twitter. If you followed us on Twitter, that's a terrible screenshot. The first thing you'll see in our profile is our link to our Padlet, but you'd also get to our Padlet through that QR code. And what our Padlet has on it is all of the working papers, blogs, videos, other resources, wherever possible, all our peer-reviewed papers are collated. It's a hugely unstructured piece of the internet. That's technical, isn't it? It's an unstructured piece of the internet, other than it's all now put into columns. So if you're interested in coaching, let's say for teacher development, you can find a column with all the links that we have for that. But you have to kind of scroll backwards and upwards to try and find the stuff you want. That's what the Padlet looks like. And on the Padlet, a new addition on the Padlet, are a series of short videos. And that's a horrible picture of me in a short video talking about coaching. So there's more than you can take away with you today. We're going to focus on one thing. We're going to focus on dilemma-based coaching. And it is an emerging form of coaching. I'll tell you something about where it's come from, and we'll also have a go at it. But let's just start with reality. Your teachers, your leaders, your managers, you are all somewhere associated in the education world. And as Sonia said, education is messy. Schools are messy. We can't pretend that we can create sterile, clinical, easily measurable, easily controllable environments in schools. It's a nonsense to assume that. And we actually can't do that for teachers any more than we can for pupils. We can't create lovely robots of teachers that will move through their career, meeting milestones and constantly ticking off boxes. We know that we're human. To be human is to be really quite messy. And part of that mess is the fact that it's not easy. The job we do is not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because we're constantly faced with dilemmas. So I'm just going to ask you to share with your peer, your somebody next to you, the kind of dilemmas that you face. Just for a couple of minutes, what are the kinds of dilemmas that you face? And if the first thing you do is try and work out together what we mean by dilemmas, that's fine as well. I'll let you just take 2 minutes of space. Okay? What kind of dilemmas do you face?
Yeah, the idea of not gardening.
Yeah, so
Okay, so that's not enough time for you to talk your way through and out of your dilemmas, but you've at least put some on the table. You've been honest with each other and you've thought a little bit about your day job. I think one of the things that most characterises our work as educators are the dilemmas that we face. And that's why we've been trying to work in this area. Let me just introduce Yasmin. This is Yasmin. She is in her first year as a new Senko in the school. Perhaps some of you have been Senkos, are Senkos. And she was thinking about the first 4 months in her post. And on a very simple level, she was thinking about, well, which weeks went well, which weeks didn't go so well? Am I on an upward trajectory or a downward trajectory in terms of how happy I am in post, how confident I am in post, how do I feel about myself in post? And she drew herself a little chart. And as you can see, overall, the news is good. After 4 months, she's feeling a bit better about herself in that post than she was at the beginning. You do worry a bit about the beginning, but it's probably very real. So, she is new. She's not a new teacher, but she's new as Senko. Who knows whether she's in a brand new school in that role or in the same school? Who knows? I'm sorry, you may not be able to see the writing because it's white, so I will read those to you. What dilemmas has she faced in those first 4 months? Here are 3 examples. The first one, say she's accounting for the beginning, started at a low point. I was nervous and I messed up a parent contact meeting. This led to someone soliciting negative comments from other parents. It's hard when you face that. First few weeks left me exhausted. Probably the next few weeks did as well, actually, but the first few weeks left me exhausted. I was trying to manage so many expectations. And I was working with a social worker to support a looked-after child. I felt that the more I learned, the more complex the challenges became. Now, you could look at that and think, well, why would anybody do that job? And you could look at that and say, well, that's the kind of bad press that we shouldn't be sharing about teaching, you know? But let's be true, this is real. These are the sorts of dilemmas that Yasmin will have faced, and they will have given her those moments of doubt and those moments where she went home absolutely exhausted and really couldn't be bothered the next day to get up and go back to work, but had to. The day that she went home and snapped at her own children because she just had enough. You know, all those things that do happen to us as teachers. They are real, and we've all experienced something similar. And unfortunately, they don't go away after the first 4 months. Similar dilemmas will be faced. So why are we interested in dilemmas? So the origin of this work on dilemma-based coaching, and you'll see I'll talk a bit more at the beginning of this and then you'll do more talking towards the end of this session, was an Erasmus project. Now, one of my, when I get into a real kind of tiz about stuff, one of the things I get into a tiz about is that amongst many other deprivations, we are now out of Erasmus. And it means that Whereas in the past, as academics in universities and partner organisations, we've been able to involve ourselves in rich international learning and development opportunities, we're now not. So we're being written into a bid for the future, but as external partners, and we have to claim that we have expertise that nobody else in the world has. I can't claim that, it's ridiculous. But this is a project called Promise that we led at Leeds Beckett University and had partners in 7 international contexts. It led to another project that we're just finishing this year called Repeat. But Promise stood for Promoting Inclusion in Society Through Education. It's a hugely grand ambition, and all we did was kind of create a little bit of a stepping stone in that pathway of promoting inclusion in society through education. At the heart of it was the fact that if we think about inclusion in society, and then we think about how that is represented and creates opportunities and creates dilemmas in schools, teachers have to have opportunities for professional development, which allows them to acknowledge the dilemmas that an inclusive society does bring, but also address them positively, and to learn through those dilemmas rather than to think, I can't deal with that, I'm going to pass it to somebody else. So we based our idea on the fact that when we are working in education, we find ourselves in situations that create dilemmas. As somebody said here, these are the sorts of things for which there are no easy answers. But because we're professional, we still have to make a decision. We have to make a choice. So there might not be an easy answer. There might not be a template, a rule book, a kind of this is what to do next. But it's still my job, hopefully with team around me, to make a decision about what to do next. And of course, any decisions we make have advantages and disadvantages. Of course, many of them have ethical and moral implications as well. But we must make our best professional decisions. If we can make our best professional decisions, then we can absolutely say that as teachers or school leaders, we are change agents, because we're taking situations that emerge, we're thinking them through, we're making decisions, and we are creating opportunities for change. And using the work of Sachs there, talking about educators seen as active professionals who must seek their own responses to professional dilemmas. It's not enough to buy somebody's product to create a change to the problem I've got. That's not going to solve the dilemma. It might be part of the solution. It's not enough to just read one book and think, well, that's the way to do it now, I've cracked it. You've got to contextualize it, you've got to situate it, you've got to learn with it, you've got to sit with it. And then you start to be potential change agents. And change agents is really what we all came into teaching to be, isn't it? You remember sitting at that interview for your PGCE or your BA/QTS or your first job as an NQT, or if you're as old as me, a probationer. What did you say you wanted to be? You wanted to make a difference to children and young people's lives and opportunities and outcomes. That's the definition of being a change agent. So we face dilemmas, and through those dilemmas we have opportunities to be change agents. And because I work in coaching and mentoring most frequently, I can see that connection really clearly. So I see coaching as one of the ways in which we can take dilemmas, work with them, sit with them, talk to them if you like, and then actually start to make a difference as a result of the quality of thinking that I've been able to do in relation to that dilemma. Coaching is not the only answer, but coaching might be one of the mechanisms through which we work through dilemmas. And if we take this as a definition of coaching, then you can start to see why. So it is an interpersonal process. Process is a horrible word. Practice is much better. It's between people. It's relational, would be another way of describing it. It is sustained, and it is dialogue-based. So the quality of the conversation will make a difference to the quality of the thinking. It's not irrelevant how the conversation emerges. I use the word sustained in 2 ways when I'm thinking about coaching. One is that quite frequently we might try and set up a relationship with a coach and coachee that lasts for a period of time. They come back, they revisit issues, they think about change, development, opportunities over a period of time. But I'm also going to say that I believe it is possible to if you like, clarify that in a single coaching conversation, if we sustain our focus, that can also be good enough. It doesn't necessarily need to be a 3-year relationship or a come back type relationship. If we sustain our focus in our dialogue, then it can be good enough. And what is happening while you're working, there's a coach, you're working with somebody, and you're helping them to be more reflective, because being more reflective helps to create opportunities for decision making, and that's where action emerges. And decisions can be made in coaching conversations themselves, but they often need to be reframed and revisited later because that was out of context. What's most important is that the quality of the thinking that goes on in the coaching session informs the decisions beyond it. You know, when you're in situ, when you're sitting 3 weeks later thinking, right, what do I do next then? That's where the quality decision making and therefore action starts to emerge. And what are we also saying about coaching? Well, it's about, for educators, it's bringing together the personal and the professional. It's professional because we have a role to do. We're in a situation which is framed for us, and it's our responsibility to act. But it's personal because it's me doing it. It's not a robot. It's not them over there. It's me. I have to make those decisions. So if we just take that as a broad definition, extend this very briefly, some of the work that I tend to draw on when I'm thinking about coaching. Anthony Grant, the late Anthony Grant, worked in coaching across a whole range of industries, but including education. What I find particularly helpful about his work is he reminds us that coaching does not just mean one thing. You can have all sorts of practices that can appropriately be framed as coaching, but they have a general, if you like, coherent aim, which is to create opportunity for change, whether that's for an individual or organisation. Doesn't mean the change is already dictated and the coaching is just driving towards a dictated change. That's not coaching, but they create opportunities for change. And Christian van Nieuwenburg, some of his work particularly relates to the nature of talk in coaching. So the focus of talk being the definition of coaching. Okay. And then in another piece of my work here, just thinking about the significance of the relationships, that space that we create between the two people, or a small group if it's peer coaching, where the relationships allow coaching conversations to flourish and make a difference. So we're going to try to create a situation where you can experience a conversation that feels a bit like that, but with our focus on dilemmas. So, dilemma-based coaching. This came from that project, the Erasmus project, Promise. Although it only came at the very end. Quite often what you discover when you've had a 3-year piece of funding is that it's only at the end that the gem appears. And actually it wasn't planned for. That's the best thing, isn't it, about life, that things are created that aren't planned for. But this emerged. Notion of coaching being about conversation, and the notion of coaching being about sustained and focused conversation, and a model of coaching which puts the dilemma at the centre. Okay? So not the target, the dilemma. And inevitably, I could just say, well, I think coaching around dilemmas would be fab, off you go. But what you try and do is you try and create some opportunity to understand how to frame a conversation that might put dilemmas at their centre and have the qualities of coaching that we think are beneficial. And so the way we tend to do that is by scaffolding coaching through questions, but not scripting coaching through questions. And there is quite a big difference. If we script something, then what we do is we tend to set up anxieties about whether we're following a script. We tend to stop listening because I'm worried about what comes next on my script, as opposed to if I scaffold, if you like, I have these at my disposal. I can use these sorts of questions when they are appropriate. However, to get from a kind of baseline of having not done this ever to a place where you may be really, really fluent and fluid at dilemma-based coaching, you probably do need to use them a little bit like a script, okay? Because you're practicing, you're rehearsing this idea. So just for a moment, go to that dilemma you shared with your colleague. I know Sonia said thousands, so I don't think you shared thousands. But if there was a dilemma in your head, just for a moment ask yourself, as you were explaining it to somebody else, what did you share with them? Did you tell them what it was concerned with? Probably, otherwise how do you even start? Did you think about who was involved? You know, who is this dilemma related to? Is it a child? Is it a colleague? Is it very much just to do with you? Is it a community, or is it very sort of singular? How does it make you feel? You know, does it leave you feeling frustrated? Does it leave you feeling anxious? Does it leave you feeling empowered or disempowered? You know, what are those feelings that are associated with the dilemma? Then making sense of it. So not just taking it as a single incident, but trying to work out what's influencing that thing. Why, for example, why it might be a recurring dilemma. What is going on out there in the system, in the culture, in the context that means this keeps coming at me? Or is it something that's kind of emerged quite quickly? So the pandemic was a good example of that, wasn't it? It created overnight multiple dilemmas for everybody working in education and wider society. So that was influencing it. But a dilemma is not the end. The dilemma is the moment where you acknowledge something is happening and needs attention, and it becomes potentially the place from which change emerges. And you're the professional, you're the person who has this dilemma. Probably already you're beginning to think about the opportunities for change. And as a person, you might be thinking, okay, I can see those opportunities, but I do or don't feel confident about them. Am I the right person, or do I need to involve other people? How confident am I? As a coach, if I'm here talking this through with you, I can ask you how I might help you. And depending on my understanding of you and your understanding of me, the answer might be very different. But if I was the sort of coach who had previously worked in a similar role to you, it would be perfectly legitimate for me to say, how can I help you? And for the coachee to say, did you ever have this dilemma? And what did you do if? But it's been invited rather than kind of, you know, rolled in. And of course, if it's a really good dilemma, like juicy dilemmas, chances are that a conversation with a coach is not really going to resolve much. But what it might do is trigger you to do something else, which might include going and talking to other people, recognizing you're part of a community and others will be able to support you and help. So if you were thinking about a dilemma that was emerging or just feels to be very persistent and hasn't got very far yet, those might be the sort of questions that help you tease out the characteristics, the qualities, the nature of that dilemma. But what we're interested in as well is not just how can we describe and define the dilemma and what might I do, but actually if I just define and describe it and understand it like that, and if I make some decisions related to it as a result of some better thinking, what have I learned? Not just, right, I've had that dilemma, I've sorted it somehow, put it in a box and I move on. What have I learned through going through this process of analysis, if you like? And these are the sorts of questions that tend to be useful in promoting that reflective thinking that helps us to understand how we have changed, how we have moved on, what we've learned and what we can take forward from thinking through and working with that dilemma. When we first introduced, I'm not going to read them because you can read them, but when we first introduced this, our assumption kind of was that, you know, a dilemma-based coaching cycle might appear where in the first instance, these are the sorts of questions you ask, and then 2 months later you come back and you ask these questions. But of course it's not as simple as that. As we start to work, we've been working with groups of teachers having a go at this, including now a year-long project in Leeds focused on inclusion. What we find is that as they become better at listening to each other and therefore more able to make decisions as coaches, their questions kind of dip in and out of both boxes. So it's not as simple as before and after, but sometimes it's helpful to at least have some sense of, well, the purpose here is focusing on the learning and the purpose here is focusing on understanding the dilemma. But things like, what might be the legacy of this approach? So you've done something, but what difference might it make in the longer term that I'd learned to do that, I had the confidence, or I brought those people in, or I changed that situation? And one of the words that Actually, do you know what, Sonia? I can't remember whether you used this word or whether I thought of this word when you were saying things. The notion of articulating learning, saying out loud what you've learned, sharing with others. Actually being brave enough to say, yeah, these were the things that I was dealing with, and now let's see how I can support others because of what I've learned. So I'm going to give you a go. And we've got a bit of time, probably about 8 minutes, not long. But it's impossible to do this easily, kind of clinically, straightforwardly. I'm just going to suggest that you play with it, right? Play with this idea. You've got two choices, essentially. You can either find somebody who's prepared to have a conversation that looks a bit like this. Okay, and then if you find that person, decide who's going to be the person with the dilemma and who's going to be the coach. Probably just do it once, because if you try and repeat it in reverse, we're going to run way out of time. If you don't like that idea, or if it feels like you haven't got a natural pairing, if there's a few more of you perhaps, just play with the idea as a concept. Just talk it through, think about it. Explore experiences that you've had which felt like this. Think about moments where this might have been helpful. Basically just play for about 8 minutes, but try not to just go completely off task, because otherwise we're wasting everybody's time, really. About 8 minutes of just thinking it through. Have a go, talk about it, whatever you like, and then we'll draw it together. Okay? Okay, I am going to have to interrupt. I'm really sorry to interrupt. We have obviously only a very short amount of time for these sessions. I would like to give you some feedback, okay, which you might not be expecting, but I would like to give you some feedback, which is that the most wonderful thing typically happens when we introduce something like this into a group of teachers, which is that they come alive because they're talking about the kids, their colleagues, their communities that they care passionately about and they want to support. So it's a moment, always. We've done this all over the, not all over the world, sounds terribly glamorous, not all over the world, but you know, when we do something like this, we've done something like this with another project, a model we're calling co-coaching. We did it in Budapest with this amazing array of people, and you just sort of think, how can this work? How can this work? It's Budapest, it's completely different, and woof, it just comes alive. So one of the lovely things about this is it seems to be really accessible. It doesn't seem too technical. You haven't got to come and watch me in action, and then we'll try and micro kind of analyze that thing and then micromanage our way out of it. You just can do it and just get into it. Another thing which is lovely watching you is how your body language mirrors your enthusiasm for listening to the other person, or your enthusiasm for sharing with the other person, or as you're trying to fathom things out, you've got that little bit of, hand movement and eye movement. It's all kind of like, I'm making sense of it, I'm piecing it together. Oh, it's all unraveled. There's a whole host of things going on. We could spend ages analyze. We could use Iris. We could film everybody doing it and analyze all the little dimensions of those conversations if we chose. That's the sort of sad thing I would do, that I could choose to do. But what's great about this as well, we have found, is that, okay, you've had a quick taster, and you could probably tell me how it felt. And the bit that worked, the bit that didn't work, the odd thing, what it was similar to. But as we're beginning to talk to people having a go at this, we're finding some common threads, okay? And if you think about these comments that people have given us in our kind of development work, and then think about Yasmin, think about those 3 dilemmas that she shared. If she'd had the opportunity for dilemma-based coaching, the kind of conversation you just played with, might she have felt some of these things? So, okay, it isn't just about working towards a solution, because there isn't an easy solution. So let's put that away. But we've surfaced the dilemma, we've turned it over, and that actually helps, because I'm now making sense of some of the dimensions of my job and the people I'm trying to support. It's not about finding solutions, a bit of an obsession people had here, but because there isn't one. And it's a comparison with some other forms of coaching which are goal-orientated. This is not like that. It's about creating this mind map of people's thoughts out loud, and listening and exploring and starting to understand where the tweaks or the decisions might come in the future. Developing understanding, because you're unpacking something in some depth. So if you only had a few minutes to do that. But in finding that understanding, you might be building insight. You might be kind of thinking, okay, I can't do that, but I can do this. Or when I did this, I think now it made a difference. I'll focus on that. So those insights. And the notion that you don't feel quite so isolated because it's just down to you. It's, trouble shared is a trouble halved. Is that even a saying? I don't know. It's that sort of thing. Reducing isolation. Now, the odd thing about that is that I thought that was just in the moment of coaching with one other person. But the work we're doing with the network in Leeds, they're coming together like this, about this many people. They're coming together every half term, and we're doing dilemma-based coaching. And they're doing it. And we kind of said, do you want to just do this online? You don't need to come together. Like, no. Do you want to just do this in private? No, we want to come together and have the conversations where we can hear other people having conversations about their dilemmas, because it makes me feel less shit. Because we've all got dilemmas, and then we talk about them, which are the common threads and the themes, etc. they emerge. That is, I'd never, and it sounds really naive, I'd never thought they were going to share that. I thought they were going to say, well, we can just go and do this now. We don't have to keep coming, trawling all through Leeds after school. They'd still come together, and they want to, because it's actually a community as well as a process or a practice. And then this whole notion of, the fact that we're grappling with dilemmas together, we're journeying through those issues, we're sharing our experiences, it's a way of building empathy and understanding, and we all could do with a little more of that. We're starting to think as researchers about, well, what do we think is emerging in relation to the dilemma-based coaching, but also trying to characterise what are these dilemmas? What are the typical dilemmas? Because in a primary school in Birmingham, the dilemma will have some characteristics that are different from, but also similar to, a private school up in, York. But there's something about the inherent nature of education, the common nature of education, which means that we can start to understand it through dilemmas. And just as a final slide, I'm not that keen on people who just take single quotes and keep repeating them. But, it's kind of human nature. There is one that I do keep repeating, and it's this one from Colthagen's work. Because I'm interested in teachers learning, and because he is, because it speaks to me about the kind of stupid polarization that is set up in our sector about theory and practice, and it relates very much to the theme of this conference, I think. What we are trying to do when we're trying to create conditions for teacher learning, and what we see when teachers actually learn, is that they've made these connections between theory and practice. And it doesn't have to be formal theory that they've read in a book or heard in a lecture. It's the theorization, it's the generalization, it's the conceptualization, and then actually what that means here, in this setting, with this person, in this moment. Those are the connections where teacher learning takes place. But that is not enough. It takes place between theory, practice and person, because it is the teacher who is the change agent who has to be making those connections, fathoming them out. That's why I think coaching can be really powerful when it does that. And from some of my work in terms of what we understand about the mechanisms, and I'm interested in video. I think my first academic paper about 15, 16 years ago was about student teachers using video with their mentors to understand their learning and their development. What we can see happening when we get it right, for example, through coaching as a mechanism for teacher learning, is that coaching scaffolds and frames the learning. It creates, it creates a focus to it, and it supports and maintains that learning. And measure, we have to sometimes say, have we made progress here? Coming back to a coaching conversation, have we made progress in this dilemma, for example? It gives us a sense of change. But we also need to be in a place where our work really encourages problem solving and creativity, because we as teachers have the capacity to use our creativity to be problem solvers, even when there are no easy solutions. So our learning has to embrace that and create those moments. And learning also, which is a space where we promote dialogue. Dialogue promotes understanding, both understanding of self and understanding of others, and coaching is a great tool for that. And it's dialogue which provides opportunities for provocation and challenge. It's not just about saying, if you do this, I'll come back and tell you you've done the right thing. That's not provocation. That's, micromanagement again. Provocations, because what we need are teachers who are creative, who can problem solve, because their thinking is critical. And not critical because they basically just nag on at everybody and criticise, but critical because it's sharp, it's intelligent, and it's valid and authentic in that moment. So, there you go. Take it and play with it if you want to. It's entirely yours. If you want to go to that Padlet, which we had at the very beginning, on the Padlet there is a column right to the right-hand side, because it's only just been added. That's the QR code for the Padlet, or you can always grab me and I'll share it with you. There is a column now with everything we've got on dilemma-based coaching, and it's just the beginning. There will be more, but there's a few blogs there, and if you want to know more, you can find it there. Okay, hope that was useful, interesting, whatever, pass the time.